Welcome back to another edition of This Month at the TNM. Last month we looked at one of the biggest sticks Project Fear likes to swing. You know the feds would deploy military forces against us if we tried to get our independence. There are so many factors that go into why this isn't just unlikely, it's damn near impossible. Last month we looked at some historical and legal foundations for lawful withdrawal and how these foundations have been applied around the world throughout history and continuing today. We looked at specific examples of how the question of independence has been and is being handled in the real world. If you haven't seen the June program, I encourage you to seek it out on the TNM website or on YouTube. This month, we'll continue our deep dive into the issue to show why the people who try to scare you with this threat don't really know what they're talking about. The United States military operates under strict adherence to civilian control and a professional ethical code that explicitly restricts its role in domestic political matters. This isn't just tradition, it's fundamental to the American system of government. Military personnel swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This oath creates an immediate ethical dilemma when even considering action against Texans exercising their constitutional right to self-government. The moral conflict becomes even more apparent when we look at the composition of today's military. Approximately 170,000 Texans currently serve in the United States Armed Forces, representing one of the largest state contingents in the military. These service members would face an impossible choice: follow orders that violate their oath to defend the Constitution, or resist orders that would require them to take up arms against their own people. Under Article 1, Section 22 of the Texas Constitution, any Texan in the military who took up arms against the lawfully expressed will of Texas voters would be committing treason against their state. Military leadership understands these challenges. In a 2009 survey, 42% of active duty military personnel and their family members agreed that states have the right to peacefully withdraw from the Union. This isn't really surprising given the military's emphasis on constitutional principles and the defense of democratic values. When nearly half of military families support the basic right of peaceful withdrawal, the prospect of reliable military action against Texas becomes pretty doubtful. The practical barriers to military intervention become even more apparent when looking at current U.S. military infrastructure and strategy. Texas hosts 15 major military installations representing billions of dollars in infrastructure and critical components of national defense. These bases aren't just buildings and airfields. They're integral parts of America's global military capability. Fort Hood. Yeah, I know it was renamed Fort Cavazos, but I live right next door to it, and it'll always be Fort Hood to me. And thank goodness it's had its name restored. Fort Hood alone houses America's largest armored warfare training and deployment facility. Any military action against Texas would immediately compromise these vital military assets and severely impair U.S. defensive capabilities worldwide. The strategic importance of Texas to national defense just can't be overstated. Texas serves as a crucial deployment hub for forces heading to both the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. The state's Gulf Coast ports are vital for military logistics and power projection. Compromising these assets through military action against Texas would create unprecedented vulnerabilities in America's global defense posture, a risk that military strategists would find unacceptable. Furthermore, U.S. military is currently stretched thin with global commitments. Military planners must balance threats from near-peer competitors like China and Russia, ongoing counterterrorism operations, and various regional security challenges. The logistics of reorienting significant military resources for domestic action against Texas would severely compromise America's ability to meet these existing commitments and maintain global strategic stability. Modern military doctrine emphasizes the importance of public support for successful operations. Public, that's us. The military learned hard lessons about operating without public backing during Vietnam. Any military action against Texas would face overwhelming public opposition, not just from Texans, but from Americans nationwide who'd view it as an unconscionable use of force against peaceful democratic expression. This lack of public support would make military action not just politically untenable, but operationally impossible under current U.S. military doctrine. The military's own training and operational procedures would further complicate any intervention. U.S. military personnel are extensively trained in the laws of armed conflict and rules of engagement that specifically restrict actions against civilian populations. Ordering troops to take action against civilians participating in a peaceful democratic process would violate these fundamental principles and would likely result in widespread refusal of orders at all levels of command. This combination of ethical constraints, practical limitations, and strategic considerations makes military intervention following a Texit referendum not just unlikely, but virtually impossible within the framework of current U.S. military doctrine and capabilities. The military's own principles and procedures effectively preclude such action, especially when directed against a peaceful exercise of democratic rights. The reality of modern military operations also raises serious questions about the feasibility of any intervention. Consider just the logistics. Texas covers 268,597 square miles, more territory than any European country except Russia. Modern military doctrine suggests that effective occupation of hostile territory requires between 20 and 25 troops per thousand civilians. With a population of 30 million, this would require a deployment of 600,000 to 750,000 troops, far more than the entire active duty U.S. military force stationed in Texas. These numbers can become even more problematic when considering Texas urban centers. Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Austin represent some of the largest and most complex urban environments in North America. Modern military strategists understand that urban warfare is extraordinarily difficult and costly, requiring massive force commitments while risking significant civilian casualties. The U.S. military's own training documents acknowledge that urban combat operations are among the most challenging and resource-intensive missions forces can undertake. The presence of veterans in Texas adds another layer of complexity. Texas is home to the second largest veteran population in the United States, with approximately 1.6 million veterans representing every branch of service. These veterans possess extensive military training and intimate knowledge of military tactics and procedures. Their presence would make any military action exponentially more complicated as they understand both the capabilities and limitations of military operations. Moreover, the U.S. military's command and control infrastructure relies heavily on bases and facilities located in Texas. The state hosts critical communications nodes, logistics centers, and training facilities that can't simply be abandoned or compromised. Any military action would require commanders to somehow maintain these essential functions while at the same time conducting operations against the very infrastructure they depend on. This is a practical impossibility in modern warfare. The integration of Texas Air National Guard units in the U.S. Air Force's air defense network prevents another strategic problem. These units currently maintain alert facilities protecting critical American airspace. Military action against Texas would create immediate vulnerabilities in national air defenses, vulnerabilities that America's adversaries would be very quick to exploit. These practical barriers are reinforced by the military's own institutional culture. The U.S. military takes pride in its role as a defender of constitutional principles and democratic values. Ordering it to act against citizens engaged in a peaceful democratic process would create a fundamental conflict with this institutional identity, likely resulting in a crisis of confidence throughout the chain of command. The politics of military intervention against Texas would create an insurmountable challenge for any federal administration who would even contemplate such action. Recent polling consistently shows that 43% of Americans believe states have justification for leaving the Union. Among conservatives, that number jumps to 65%. These numbers make building public consensus for military action pretty much impossible, especially given America's increasing political polarization. The U.S. military's own demographic makes it even harder. With 42% of military personnel and their families believing states have an absolute right to withdraw, any order for military intervention would face internal resistance that could split the armed forces. This isn't theoretical. It's backed up by polling data showing deep skepticism among service members about using force against civilian populations, especially in response to peaceful political processes. Military action against Texas would likely trigger a cascade of political crises in other states. Those with strong sovereignty movements or similar grievances with federal overreach would view intervention as proof that reform within the system is impossible. Rather than deterring withdrawal movements, military action would likely accelerate them, potentially leading to a broader dissolution of the Union, precisely the outcome intervention would seek to prevent. The political fallout would extend beyond domestic concerns. America's global standing as a champion of democratic principles would be irreparably damaged. Nations that have long looked to the United States as a model of democratic governance would be forced to take another look at their relationship with a country willing to use military force to suppress peaceful democratic expression. Texas stands as the world's 10th largest economy with a GDP of over 2 trillion. This economic power makes military intervention not just politically risky, but economically suicidal. The immediate impacts would be severe and far reaching. Let's take a look at some facts. It's kind of a long list, but just bear with me on this. There would be energy sector disruption. Texas produces approximately 40% of U.S. crude oil and 25% of natural gas. It houses the nation's largest concentration of refineries and petrochemical facilities. It controls critical energy infrastructure, including pipelines and export terminals. Military conflict would instantly create unprecedented energy crisis. Now, as far as trade and transportation, Texas ports handle nearly two-thirds of all Gulf Coast container traffic. The state's transportation infrastructure serves as a crucial trade corridor with Mexico. Major international airports serve as key global commerce hubs. Disrupting these trade routes would paralyze significant portions of U.S. commerce. Texas is big on technology and defense industries. Texas hosts major technology corridors vital to U.S. economic competitiveness. Multiple defense contractors maintain critical manufacturing facilities. The state's semiconductor industry is crucial to national security. Military action would threaten this infrastructure, compromising national capabilities. There would be agricultural impact. Texas leads the nation in cattle, cotton, and numerous other agricultural products. The state's food processing and distribution networks are vital to national food security. Military conflict would disrupt these essential supply chains. Rural economic devastation would spread far beyond Texas. The broader economic consequences of military intervention would extend far beyond immediate disruptions. In financial markets, the stock market could collapse as investors flee uncertainty. Bond market could have crisis as U.S. credit ratings face downgrades. Currency devaluation as international confidence in U.S. stability erodes. Banking system stress as Texas-based financial operations face disruption. And potential alternative currency arrangements bypassing the U.S. dollar. What about the international economic response? Trade partners would likely impose sanctions against U.S. aggression. Foreign investors would withdraw from U.S. markets. International businesses would diversify away from U.S. partnerships. Global supply chains would be permanently restructured. There would be an impact on the Federal Reserve System. The Dallas Fed's crucial role in monetary policy would be compromised. Payment clearing systems would face unprecedented disruption. Interbank lending markets would likely freeze. Overall financial system stability would be threatened. Corporate America would face unprecedented challenges that would reshape the national economy. Major corporations would be forced to choose between federal compliance and protecting their Texas assets. Shareholder litigation would likely prevent many companies from supporting intervention. Corporate relocations would accelerate, potentially triggering a broader economic exodus. Supply chain disruptions would force massive industrial reorganization. The combined economic impact would create a downturn potentially worse than the Great Depression. The destruction of wealth would be unprecedented, affecting personal savings and retirement accounts, real estate values nationwide, small business viability, state and local government finances, federal tax revenues, and debt service capability. These economic realities serve as an absolute deterrent against military intervention. No federal administration could survive the political consequences of triggering such comprehensive economic devastation. The economic arguments alone make military intervention following a successful TEXIT referendum not just unlikely, but practically impossible. That's enough for this month. There are other factors we'll discuss sometime in the future, but I hope you can see that this fear tactic that's being thrown in our faces just can't withstand the light of truth being shown on it. It's good being with you all this month. I'll see you again next time.